Orrin Howell stepped through the sliding glass doors of the hospital lobby, the scent of disinfectant hitting him like a wall. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, reminding him of airport terminals and sleepless nights. He tapped his platinum credit card on the reception counter, his Rolex catching the light as he checked the time for the third time in 2 minutes. He was still fighting off the tail end of jet lag from Berlin, and some kind of flu he had picked up along the way was making him feel worse than hospital coffee. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with a stiff bun and a name tag that read Patricia Cole, looked up at him with the weariness of someone who had long stopped being surprised by anything. "Sir, if you could just complete these forms," she said, sliding a clipboard toward him. "I do not have time for paperwork," Orrin said, his voice steady but firm. "I need to see a doctor, now, not later." His tone carried the weight of a man who had built a $50 million electronics empire from the ground up. He was not used to waiting, but Patricia wasn't intimidated. She typed something into her computer, her fingers clacking on the keyboard like a woodpecker on metal. "Name and date of birth, please." "Orrin Howell, March 15th, 1968. The clicking stopped. Patricia's brow furrowed. Her eyes darted back and forth between Orrin and her screen. She blinked twice, her face draining of color. "I'm sorry, sir. There appears to be a system error." "What kind of error?" Orrin leaned forward, his Italian leather shoes creaking against the linoleum floor. She swallowed hard. "According to our records, you're deceased." The words hit him like a physical punch, his mouth opened slightly. "Excuse me?" She turned the monitor toward herself and whispered, "It says you passed away on April 10th, 5 days ago, in Munich." Orrin took a step back. The room seemed to tilt slightly. He grabbed the counter to steady himself. The smell of antiseptic, the cold air, the harsh lighting, it all suddenly felt like a dream teetering on the edge of nightmare. That's impossible. I just flew in from Berlin yesterday." Patricia nodded slowly. "Sir, I believe you, but there's a death certificate on file, issued and signed." "By whom?" She hesitated. "Next of kin, Leland Howell." Silence stretched out like a cold breath. Orrin stared at her. "My son?" His voice sounded like it was coming from someone else. Patricia stood and disappeared into a filing cabinet. After a few moments, she returned with a manila folder and slid it across the counter. Inside was a copy of a California death certificate. His name was typed in capital letters. Cause of death? Cardiac arrest. Location? Munich, Germany. Every detail was disturbingly accurate. His date of birth, his passport number, even a forged version of his signature. But he was standing right there, breathing. He stared at the paper, his hands trembling slightly. "I need a copy of this." Patricia moved to the copier, her hands no steadier than his. "Should I call the police?" she asked. "This might be fraud, or identity theft." "Not yet," Orrin said, folding the copy and slipping it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "I need to understand what's happening." He turned and walked out of the hospital. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Outside, the California sun was warm on his face, too bright for a man who had just learned he was legally dead. Somewhere in the city, people were planning a funeral, his funeral, and the man responsible, his son, was likely counting the inheritance already. The drive home passed in a blur. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. The death certificate burned in his jacket like a silent accusation. As he turned onto the tree-lined street of Pacific Heights, something in him shifted. The shock hardened into a cold, focused resolve. He parked in the circular driveway of his home. Everything looked normal. The trimmed hedges, the brick walkway, the antique porch light he had installed himself. But it all felt wrong now, like walking into a museum of a life he no longer owned. Inside, the familiar creak of hardwood floors greeted him. He made his way to the study and poured himself a cup of coffee. The mug trembled slightly in his grip. Around him, framed photographs lined the room. Family trips, birthdays, graduations, smiling faces, smiling Leland. He walked over to the tall filing cabinet and opened the top drawer. Empty. He pulled open the next one. Also empty. His hand hovered over the third drawer. He opened it slowly. Nothing. Documents were missing. Medical proxies, insurance records, financial authorizations, all the forms that required his signature. All had been there before his trip. Now they were gone. He turned back to his desk, opened his laptop, and began to connect the dots. Leland had keys to the house. He had asked questions about the will just weeks ago, something about family planning. He had known Oren's exact travel schedule. He had access to everything. And now, legally, Oren was dead. He sat back in his leather chair, the gears in his mind turning. Leland was his only child. Brilliant, charismatic, but reckless. For years, Oren had covered his gambling debts, paid off credit cards, bailed him out of tight corners. But this was different. This was betrayal wrapped in bureaucracy. He closed his eyes and took a breath. Leland thought he had pulled it off, but Oren Howell was not the type of man to stay buried. Oren Howell stood in the center of his study, surrounded by silence. The smell of dark roast coffee drifted from the kitchen, but he had forgotten it hours ago. The cup on his desk had gone cold, untouched since he'd returned from the hospital. He slowly turned to look at the family photographs on the wall. Smiling faces, sunlit vacations, graduation caps, fishing trips. But now each picture felt like a cruel joke, a photo album curated by a man who had no idea his own son had declared him dead. He walked to the filing cabinet again, opening each drawer one more time. Still empty. 3 weeks ago, before his trip to Berlin, it had been full. Medical proxy forms, insurance documents, property titles, everything locked neatly in place. Only 2 people had keys to this cabinet, Oren and his son Leland. He returned to his desk, opened his laptop, and began to dig. 20 years of running Howell Tech had made these searches second nature. He logged into the company's internal systems, scanned employee files, and opened Leland's folder. The salary was still listed, $200,000 per year. A generous number. But the signs had been there. A new Tesla last month, designer suits, mentions of trips to Las Vegas. It all added up. He opened a new browser tab and searched Leland's public social media. There were no recent posts, but a handful of tagged photos showed him partying at rooftop bars, dressed like a tech mogul. One photo included a caption that made Oren freeze. "One more week and it's all mine." The timestamp? 2 days before the death certificate was filed. Oren leaned back in his chair. The leather groaned beneath him. He switched tabs again, this time opening financial records. He still had admin access to the company's accounts and employee expense reports. Leland's name popped up more than it should have. A series of credit card statements appeared. Maxed out balances, late payments, cash advances. Then he opened Leland's 401k records. He had borrowed against it twice in the past year. That was unusual. And then came the final piece. Leland had submitted an internal request for early inheritance advice 3 months earlier, stating he was exploring options for buying a home. There had never been any home. Oren narrowed his eyes. The story was unraveling fast. His son wasn't just irresponsible, he was desperate, and desperation made people dangerous. He rose and crossed the room to the windows. Outside, the Pacific Heights neighborhood looked the same as it always had. Cherry blossoms in bloom, mail trucks humming, dogs being walked by their owners. A peaceful spring day, but something was different now. 2 neighbors strolled past, both wearing black suits. One carried a bouquet of white lilies. They stopped near Oren's front gate, speaking in hushed voices, glancing toward his house. He stepped back from the window. They were going to his funeral. Oren sat down again, this time calmer. He pulled open a leather notebook and began to write. March 28th, departed for Berlin. April 10th, declared dead in Munich. April 15th, returned home to find death certificate April 16th. Funeral scheduled. Leland had known every detail, his father's itinerary, his access codes, even his password hint. First fishing trip with Leland. He had planned this with surgical precision. Oren returned to the laptop, pulled up the home surveillance logs. He kept a security system, mostly for insurance reasons. The footage wasn't stored long, but he hoped something remained. After a few minutes of navigating archived files, he found a clip from 2 weeks ago. Leland entering the study, alone, wearing gloves. Oren clicked pause. His own desk was in the frame, the same desk that now sat stripped of documents. The footage was blurry, but the intent was unmistakable. His son had robbed him without ever touching a dollar. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. A lifetime of mentoring, forgiving, guiding, erased in a single move. Oren took a deep breath, steadying his hands. He pulled out the folded copy of the death certificate and set it beside his laptop. Then he opened a secure messaging app and typed one name, Donald Rayner, his longtime lawyer, friend, trusted confidant. He didn't hit send, not yet. Instead, he clicked through to the company's most recent quarterly report. Howell Tech was valued at just under $100 million. And Oren, as the founder and majority shareholder, controlled nearly all of it. Inheritance documents named Leland as the primary heir. It all made sense now. For someone drowning in debt, a fake death certificate was a golden parachute. Oren stood again and walked to the bookshelf. He touched the spine of an old volume. Principles of Strategic Warfare. A gift from a friend when he launched his company. He had spent a lifetime building something out of nothing. And now he would have to unbury himself the same way. The sun hadn't fully risen, but Oren Howell had already been awake for hours. He sat at his kitchen table in his silk robe, staring at the steam curling above his second cup of coffee. The silence inside the house felt too perfect, like the calm before a courtroom verdict. The previous night had passed without sleep. Instead, he had spent it studying every detail of the forged death certificate. The phrasing, the stamps, the signature that mimicked his own, every letter a betrayal, every detail a nail in the coffin that his own son had tried to close over him. He rose and crossed into his study. The light outside was beginning to soften, revealing the carefully trimmed hedges and cobblestone walkway leading to his front door. His home, like his name, had been carefully preserved over the years. Now, both had been violated. He checked his watch. 8:57 a.m. In exactly 93 minutes, his son would be standing at the front of a chapel, accepting condolences and pretending to mourn. The doorbell rang. He froze. When he opened the front door, Letitia Green stood there in full black attire. Her husband Barney was behind her, hat in hand, equally solemn. Letitia held a bouquet of white lilies. Her face, usually animated and cheerful, was drained of color. When she saw Oren, she let out a high-pitched gasp and stepped back onto the welcome mat, as if she had seen a ghost. "Sweet heavens," she whispered. "Barney, do you see what I'm seeing?" Barney's jaw dropped open. "Oh, dear God. Oren." Oren stepped fully onto the porch, letting the door close behind him with a soft click. "Good morning," he said calmly. "You look like you've seen a dead man." Letitia's hand shot to her chest. But Leland told us you passed. Heart failure. In Germany." "Apparently Leland's quite the storyteller," Oren replied, voice level. Barney rubbed his temples. "He called the whole neighborhood yesterday. Said the body was being flown home, that the funeral was today at Colma Cemetery." "It is," Oren said, checking his watch again. 10:30 sharp. Letitia's voice trembled. "So you're alive?" "Very much so." The three stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Oren spoke again. "Listen carefully. You saw nothing. You spoke to no one. Go to the service. Act surprised by nothing. I need this to unfold a certain way." Letitia's eyes widened. "You're going to crash your own funeral?" Oren nodded. "And I want everyone who helped Leland believe it was real to be there when the truth lands like thunder." Barney grunted. "You always had a flair for drama, Oren." Oren managed a thin smile. "Not drama. Strategy." They turned and left, still shaken. Oren closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the soft hum of their car pulling away down the street. He headed back to his study, sat down at his desk, and picked up the phone. This time he did hit send. Donald Rayner, call now, emergency. The phone rang almost immediately. Orrin, is this real? It is, Orrin replied. I need your help, and I need it fast. I saw the certificate myself, Donald said. Filed in the county database, notarized, perfect formatting. Because Leland forged it with my documents, Orrin said coldly. He accessed my files while I was in Berlin. Medical proxy, passport scans, even my signature. Donald paused. And the funeral? In 90 minutes. I'm attending. Jesus, Donald muttered. You're serious. I want a full civil filing prepared by noon. Fraud, identity theft, asset freeze, everything. Donald's tone shifted. Consider it done. I'll be there. Black suit, briefcase, and all. Orrin ended the call and set the phone down gently. He opened his closet and selected the navy blue suit he had worn 5 years ago to close Howell-Tech's largest acquisition. He tied his red silk tie with careful precision, smoothed his white shirt collar, and slipped on his polished leather shoes. In the mirror, he studied himself. Older, yes. Tired, but very much alive. Downstairs, he grabbed his keys. The silver Mercedes waited in the garage like a warhorse. He opened the glove compartment and pulled out a folder labeled Estate Planning. He slipped the forged death certificate inside, along with a USB drive containing copies of financial statements, access logs, and the footage of Leland entering the study. Before backing out of the driveway, he paused. Neighbors were already parking along the street. Black cars, quiet murmurs, condolence cards in hand. One woman wiped tears from her eyes as she passed his gate. Orrin watched from behind tinted glass. The funeral hadn't started yet, but the resurrection had. The chapel at Colma Cemetery was packed by the time Orrin Howell pulled his Mercedes into the gravel parking lot. 47 vehicles by his count, black sedans, luxury SUVs, even a stretch limousine. Leland had gone all out. He parked between a Cadillac and a white Tesla, adjusted his tie, and took a deep breath. The morning sky was overcast, soft gray clouds hovering low like silent witnesses. The chapel, a stone building with dark wood doors, stood ahead like a theater set for the grandest act of all. As he stepped out of the car, a soft breeze caught the scent of lilies and fresh-cut grass. Organ music drifted faintly through the heavy chapel doors. People were filing inside in quiet clusters, dressed in black, speaking in murmurs. Many clutched tissues. Some held printed memorial programs with his face on the cover, his name below it, flanked by birth and death dates. Orrin Howell, March 15, 1968. April 10, 2025. He shook his head. The date was wrong, but the photo was real, taken at last year's company gala. He moved across the parking lot with the same confident stride he had used in boardrooms for decades. A few heads turned toward him, but quickly looked away, assuming he was just another late mourner. The heavy wooden doors stood slightly ajar. He placed his hand on the brass handle and pushed them open. The organ music stopped mid-note. In an instant, every head turned. From the back row to the front pew, faces shifted from polite interest to confusion, then to shock. A collective gasp swept through the crowd like wind through trees. One woman fainted into her husband's lap. A man near the aisle dropped his program. Someone whispered, "Is that?" Orrin took 3 steps forward and said loud and clear, "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder." Chaos erupted. People leapt to their feet. Some scrambled toward the exits. A grandmother in the 3rd row clutched her pearls and screamed. The funeral director looked like he was about to collapse. But Orrin's eyes were locked on only one person, his son, Leland Howell, standing frozen near the casket. Leland's face had gone pale. His mouth opened and closed without sound. Sweat dotted his forehead. His black funeral suit hung awkwardly on him, suddenly too big for his trembling frame. Orrin walked slowly down the center aisle. Each step echoed off the stone walls. The crowd parted as he passed, pressing back against the pews as if afraid to touch him. He saw old business partners, country club friends, even competitors, now staring as if they'd seen a ghost. When he reached the front, he stopped directly in front of his own casket. His voice was calm, almost warm. "Hello, son. Surprised to see me?" Leland blinked. "Dad, I can explain." "You'll have time for that," Orrin replied. "In court." At that moment, the chapel doors opened again. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit strode in, briefcase in hand, silver hair neat and sharp. Donald Rayner. He walked directly to Orrin's side and pulled a thick folder from his case. "Leland Marcus Howell," he said loudly, his voice carrying the tone of courtroom authority. "You are being served with a civil fraud lawsuit, criminal complaint referral, asset freeze, and a federal investigation request." He dropped the paperwork onto the polished wooden floor. It scattered like confetti across the front of the chapel. No one moved. Leland stared at the documents, then at his father, then at the cameras, because of course the reporters had arrived too. From the side door, a team from Channel 7 News entered, microphones in hand, camera rolling. Janet Morrison stepped forward, her silver hair immaculate, voice smooth and practiced. "Mr. Howell," she said, aiming her mic at Orrin, "can you confirm your son filed a false death certificate in an attempt to claim your inheritance?" Orrin kept his voice even. "I can confirm that I'm alive, which makes his death certificate inaccurate." Leland backed away slowly, eyes darting toward the side door. The crowd was silent, every eye watching. "Don't," Orrin said sharply. "Do not run." But Leland did. He turned and bolted down the side aisle, pushing past stunned mourners. The camera crew followed, reporters shouting questions as he fled into the parking lot. His footsteps echoed off the chapel steps as he vanished into the overcast morning. Inside, the silence returned. Orrin looked around at the faces, neighbors, colleagues, strangers. "Well," he said, adjusting his cufflinks, "it's not every day a man attends his own funeral." The chapel burst into scattered laughter and whispers. Janet Morrison stepped forward again. "Mr. Howell, what happens now?" Orrin looked at Donald, who nodded. "Now," Orrin said, "we make sure justice is served." San Francisco Superior Court buzzed with the kind of energy reserved for high-profile trials. Outside, the press crowded the courthouse steps. Inside, the gallery was packed. Tech journalists, former colleagues, neighbors, and curious onlookers who had followed every twist in the bizarre saga of a man who attended his own funeral. Orrin Howell sat at the plaintiff's table, polished and composed. His navy suit fit perfectly, his silver watch caught the courtroom lights, and his gaze was calm but firm. To his right sat Donald Rayner, a master litigator and longtime friend, flipping through final documents with the precision of a man about to close the biggest case of his career. Across the aisle, Leland looked like a shadow of the man who once stood in a $1,000 suit accepting condolences. His cheeks were sunken, his shoulders slumped. The expensive black suit he wore now seemed borrowed, the confidence drained from his body like water through a sieve. Beside him, defense attorney James Mitchell kept a hand on his notepad and his eyes on the jury. The bailiff's voice cut through the noise. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Chen." Judge Chen entered briskly, robes flowing, her expression unreadable. A woman in her 50s with a reputation for sharp intellect and zero tolerance for theatrics, she took her seat with practiced grace. "This is the matter of People versus Leland Marcus Howell, case number 2025 CR 4821, she announced. "Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" "The state is ready, Your Honor," said District Attorney Patricia Valdez, standing confidently. "The defense is ready," Mitchell replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "Opening statements," Judge Chen said. "Ms. Valdez, you may proceed." Valdez turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about family misunderstandings. It is not about grief. This is about greed. It is about betrayal. This is about a man who tried to steal $50 million by pretending his father was dead." She pointed gently toward Orrin. "That man is not dead. He is sitting in this courtroom, alive, betrayed, and determined to see justice served." The gallery was silent. all eyes on her. She continued, outlining the evidence: fake death certificate, forged signatures, access to legal documents, gambling debts totaling more than $2 million. By the time she sat down, even some members of the jury looked visibly rattled. James Mitchell stood slowly. His strategy was clear: deny intent, suggest confusion. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client made mistakes," he began. "But he did not commit fraud. He suffered from addiction. He was under pressure. He believed his father was gone." The words sounded empty. Orrin could see it on the jurors' faces. They were not buying it. When Judge Chen called the first witness, Orrin stood and walked to the stand. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat, facing the 12 strangers who would decide his son's fate. "Mr. Howell," Valdez began, "where were you on April 10th of this year?" "In Berlin," Orrin replied, "attending a tech conference. I posted photos of myself eating currywurst at a German cafe the same day my death certificate was filed." Laughter rippled through the gallery. Even Judge Chen allowed a faint smile. "Did you give your son permission to file that certificate?" "No. I gave him access to business documents so he could manage invoices while I traveled. I didn't expect him to bury me on paper." Again, the gallery stirred. Valdez handed over hotel receipts, timestamps, social media posts, airline records. Every detail painted the same picture. Orrin Howell was alive and well when his son declared him dead. "Mr. Howell, were you aware your son had gambling debts?" "I was not. I learned about them after I discovered the forged documents. He owed over $2 million. Was there any indication he planned to steal your estate?" "He asked about inheritance procedures weeks before I left for Europe. At the time, I thought it was curiosity. Now I know better." Mitchell stood for cross-examination, but his voice lacked bite. "Mr. Howell, is it true you had disagreements with your son over the years?" "Of course," Orrin replied. "What father and son haven't? But I never imagined he'd try to erase me." Mitchell tried again. "Could your son have misunderstood your condition? Maybe believed you were seriously ill?" "I was drinking beer in Berlin while he told 100 people I was in a morgue," Orrin said. "I don't think that qualifies as a misunderstanding." Gasps again. The gallery was hanging on every word. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses were called: neighbors who attended the funeral, the hospital administrator who pulled up the death certificate, even a bank manager who testified about Leland's sudden financial activity following the forged filing. The defense called addiction experts, psychologists, and tried to paint Leland as a desperate man, not a criminal, just a broken son. But nothing stuck. The facts were too clear. On the final day, Orrin sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, watching the jury file in. The foreman, a middle-aged man with glasses and a steady voice, stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Leland Marcus Howell, guilty on all counts." Judge Chen did not hesitate. "For forging government documents, committing wire fraud, and attempting to illegally access a $50 million estate, this court sentences you to 3 years supervised probation, $500,000 in fines, 1,000 hours of community service, and complete forfeiture of inheritance rights." The words landed like hammers. Leland slumped in his seat, defeated. "Additionally," the judge added, "you are permanently barred from participating in any aspect of Howell Tech or its subsidiaries. This ruling is effective immediately." A murmur swept through the gallery. Donald leaned close to Orrin and whispered, "That's everything." Orrin nodded once. As reporters rushed to exit the courtroom, Orrin remained seated. His son had destroyed their relationship, attempted to erase his life for money, and failed. The justice system had done its job. There would be no appeal, no second chance. Just the truth, standing tall and undisputed. Outside the courtroom, Orrin faced a crowd of microphones and flashing cameras. Reporters shouted questions, but he raised a hand. "I take no joy in what happened today," he said calmly. "But I am satisfied. The truth matters. And no one, no matter how close, gets to steal a man's legacy without consequences." Donald appeared at his side. "What now?" one reporter asked. Orrin smiled faintly. "Now? I go home. And he did. 2 weeks after the courtroom verdict, Orrin Howell stood alone at the edge of a cliff in Big Sur, watching the Pacific Ocean crash into the rocks below. The sky was overcast, the wind cool, and the air smelled like salt and pine. He inhaled deeply, feeling more alive than he had in years. No cameras, no reporters, no legal briefs or board meetings, just silence and peace. Behind him, the cliffside cabin he had rented sat tucked into the trees, modest, quiet, and completely off the grid. It was not a mansion in Pacific Heights, but it had everything he needed: a bed, a coffee pot, and a view that made his chest feel light. The media storm had finally passed. For weeks, Orrin's story had dominated the headlines: a tech magnate falsely declared dead, a son's betrayal, a funeral interrupted by resurrection. Hollywood called. 3 book agents emailed every day. There were offers for interviews, documentaries, even a limited series from a streaming giant. Orrin said no to all of it. He had already signed over Howell Tech for $100 million. The deal closed quietly, with no press conference, no farewell speech. He had written a personal letter to every employee, thanking them for their loyalty, and then walked away. Donald Rayner, now the acting CEO, called him once a week. Not about business, just to check in. "You sure you do not want to stay on as a consultant?" Donald had asked. "No," Orrin had replied. "I want to learn how to fish." And he did. His days now started with strong coffee and a fishing rod, and ended with grilled trout, jazz music, and long walks under stars. The money sat untouched in a bank account. He wore jeans instead of suits. His phone stayed silent by choice. Some mornings he read the headlines just to remind himself how far he had come. Tech titan declared dead speaks out on betrayal. Funeral fraud ends in federal charges. From grave to gavel, the Orrin Howell story. But he never responded to the articles, never gave follow-ups. The trial was over. The noise was over. He had nothing left to prove. One afternoon, while hiking through redwoods, he heard footsteps on the trail behind him. Turning around, he saw a familiar face. Letitia Green, his elderly neighbor from Pacific Heights, wearing hiking boots and a bright pink scarf. "Well, I'll be damned," Orrin said, smiling. "What are you doing way out here?" Letitia handed him a small paper bag. "Banana bread. Barney says hi. You forgot to leave an address when you vanished." "I was trying to vanish," he said with a laugh, taking the bag gratefully. "Good. You deserve a little vanishing. But just so you know, the neighborhood still talks about you like you're a movie character." "I suppose I kind of am," he said. Letitia looked at him seriously. "Do you regret any of it?" "No," Orrin said, watching sunlight filter through the trees. "I regret trusting the wrong person, but I don't regret surviving." She nodded. Before leaving, she squeezed his arm gently. "If you ever get tired of peace and quiet, you know where to find us." "I'll bring the fish," he promised. That night, Orrin sat by the fireplace, banana bread in one hand and a pen in the other. He opened a leather notebook and wrote a single sentence on the first page. "I was buried, but I wasn't dead." Then he closed the book, poured a glass of wine, and let the fire crackle into the night. Some stories do not end with fanfare or applause. They end with the quiet settling of dust, the last page turned by a steady hand, and the gentle breath of someone who has finally come home to himself. In the soft hush of that coastal cabin, far from courtrooms and headlines, Orrin Howell found something he had not felt in years: peace. Not the kind bought with money or built through power, but the kind that grows in the empty spaces left behind after betrayal, truth, and justice have all had their say. He did not win by yelling louder. He simply showed up, alive, unshaken, and unwilling to let lies bury him. And in doing so, he reminded the world that silence is not surrender. And sometimes the most powerful statement we can make is to keep standing when others expect us to fall. What this story teaches us, gently but firmly, is that truth has a quiet strength, and dignity is a shield no one can steal. no matter how clever the disguise or how cruel the intention. In a world rushing to judge, to label, to dismiss, Oren's journey reminds us, never measure a person by what you assume they are. For the truth and justice often comes from the place we least expect, even from someone we once looked right through. Many of us have been overlooked in life, too old, too soft-spoken, too kind, too quiet. We have been told to sit down, to let things go, to be grateful and stay small. But Oren's story says otherwise. It says there is power in stillness, that we are not done when others say we are, that even when we are written off, we still get to write our ending. Like the flicker of a porch light in the fog, a single act of courage, however quiet, can guide others through the darkness. Sometimes the most unforgettable victories are not loud, but earned in silence, on the inside, where our character lives. Oren did not just reclaim his name. He reminded us that even in the face of betrayal, we can choose grace, that we can hold people accountable without becoming cruel ourselves. So tonight, take a quiet moment. Let the story settle inside you, not just as entertainment, but as something deeper. Ask yourself, what would I do if the world believed I was gone? Would I stand tall, walk into the storm, and tell the truth? Or would I let someone else decide my story? And if this tale stirred something in your heart, perhaps a memory or a hope long set aside, consider sharing it, not for attention, but as a way to pass along the light. Because you never know who might be standing in the shadows, waiting for a sign that they, too, can rise. The story is done, but the lesson lingers.